Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on miamighostchronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind-the-scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon on Stories of the Supernatural. I hope you enjoy the show, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing today? I'm good. As you've seen in my last two shows, I was still getting over the loss of my well on the farm and having no water for 3 days. So I'm totally recovered. Let me tell you something that we many times overlook is the ability to turn on a faucet and get water whenever we want, not only for ourselves but for our animals and everything. So yes, I am back in I'm in happy mode. You know, like I said, we're very lucky, and sometimes we just forget how lucky we are. But anyway, today I have a super interesting guest. I know you're all going to love it. This is a lady by the name of Cory. Now, Carolyn is a futurist, a filmmaker, an international speaker, and visionary author of best-selling books on consciousness and quantum healing. As a child and throughout her life, she has always been deeply connected to spiritual topics, the study of consciousness, mechanics of the universe, and the discovery of the divine. Now, also in addition to writing and producing, she has appeared as a guest expert in numerous live and television shows, including seasons 9 and 10 of History Channel's popular series Ancient Aliens. She also, as a film documentary by the name of E.T. Contact, They Are Here, or also known as Gods Among Us, The Science of Contact, which I think is such a fascinating subject. But before we get into that, let me bring Carolyn on. How are you doing today, Carolyn?
Hi, Marlene. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure, totally. Carolyn, before we get into the subject of your present work as an adult, I'm going to ask you what I ask all my guests. I know you mentioned as far as that you had a connection since childhood with spiritual matters. Was that just something innate in you, or did you have some type of experience as a child?
Yeah, I had an experience as a child. You know, this bio that you read actually does not explain the background. Before I started writing and making films, it all started for me as a child having an experience, and the most important, I want to say, important experience, because I've had different ones, but the most impressive one, I would say, is at the age of 5. It was a spontaneous thing. I was just there, and all of a sudden, there was this kind of light body, some sort of energy that started forming, and it was right there next to me. And we started exchanging information. I was literally communicating telepathically with this thing.
Wow.
And yeah, and and it was very natural. It was very familiar. It was very comfortable. So, because people say, "Oh, were you scared?" or anything like that. Nothing like that. It was more like, "Oh, here you are."
Right. Well, children thankfully have that ability because
yeah. And so what happened, the reason why this experience is really, I think, the turning point or the starting point, it's because I realized that I could see them, I could hear them, I could sense them, and I could understand everything about them in that split second. In other words, I kind of knew who they were, where they came from, without them having to say and like introduce themselves. Hey, we're this or that. So I realized also that I could see the subtle energy in a very unique way. It's kind of like your brain doesn't work in the same way as it's working right now as a normal human, where you ask a question and then your brain kind of looks for the answer and then you look for the words and then it doesn't work this way. It's kind of like your whole brain taps into the consciousness of those beings. Wow. And it's as if, it's kind of like you become them, and it's like a stream of consciousness that kind of brings both things together so that you can understand exactly who they are, what kind of energy they bring, and communicate. And so the information was going back and forth in the form of codes. I could see tiny little codes that were kind of transferring from them to my brain, and my brain would kind of process those codes and deliver the message. So you can really, you can see.
Let me ask you, was this, and I'm going to ask you, was this just out of the blue? Was anything happening? I know as a 5-year-old, life is very simple sometimes and basic, but was there anything going on around you when this occurred as far as externally in your own life?
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good question because, now that you ask it, I realize that perhaps it's sometimes you ask for things, unconsciously. So I wasn't necessarily, at the age of 5, you don't know what you want. Mm-hmm. You don't like go, oh, I wish there was an angel or something.
Right, exactly.
I remember that what was happening, I was a very lucid and conscious observer. I remember looking around and kind of noticing how adults were behaving. Mm-hmm. And it was actually, that day was Christmas Eve. And and so I was kind of observing how humans, like the adults in my life at the time, were kind of occupied with like the tree and stuff and dinner and like, festivities and stuff like that. And I kept kind of wondering, but where is the love? I could not feel a sense of love. I felt that I was looking for an energy behind all these festivities and activities and, whatever.
Right.
So I think that's what was happening. I think I was noticing that there was a lack of deep connection and love all around me. And I'm not talking just my parents or anything, just in general. And I think that's perhaps, in my own way, on an unconscious level, was looking for something bigger and,
and receptive to it, obviously. And then what happened? Did that happen again, or?
Yeah. So at that time, I think the most important message or effect that this experience had was that they told me that they were part of the same stream of consciousness, kind of the same lineage, but I could feel that and sense that. It was very familiar. Mm-hmm. And they said that if you want to continue, we're going to be with you like the rest of your life. But if you want to communicate, you have to focus your mind in a certain way, just like you're doing right now. They were kind of like walking me through the process as I was doing it. And they're saying you have to ask. You have to focus your intent and ask for this connection, and the communication will happen that way. So that was that. And so this connection kind of stayed, but not so obvious in this way. It was kind of like on and off throughout my childhood. But I remember they would kind of pop up every time I had some sort of, dilemma or like big question. Or, for example, fast forward to the age of 10, I remember in school, I was in a Catholic school, and they were talking about in a catechism class or something. They were
Mm-hmm.
saying, I remember the teacher was saying that humans will never reach God because it's just so beyond. And,
Right.
um, she was saying, like, kind of give up almost. You have to
Yeah.
just kind of,
Right. Exactly.
and I remember I got so mad, and I just kind of got up and left the class, and I
Oh
was,
my God. You
yeah,
had to walk out.
like, and I started to talk to the beings. I said, what is the point if we're being educated that we can never reach our creator? And what am I doing here? And this is stupid. I was like, kind of like,
Right.
and so I saw them pop up again and kind of explain certain things. And so these are the types of follow-up experiences that I had on and off until I was adult. And I realized that, oh, well, this is not as common. And then, of course, I started to explore the mechanics of it. I was very fascinated by how did that just happen? How
Okay.
is it possible that one person can hear and see subtle energy and get like downloads and
Mm-hmm.
speak telepathically, and nobody around them has any clue? How does that work? And
Okay.
so by me asking these questions, I got into the whole topic of consciousness. And so I started developing methodologies for, the mechanics of consciousness, how each person, what is consciousness, how is it, what is the nature, what are the properties, what is the difference between your consciousness, my consciousness, somebody else's
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, how is it all connected, so on and so forth. And that was my work as an adult. For like 20 years, I wrote books and lectured and, taught people to do things that I could do and stuff like that.
Let me ask you, Carolyn, I see you referred to them as they. Was this like a collective they that all
Yeah,
were there? Okay.
it was
Okay.
like it was like a group, and it was interesting because the numbers and the names, it's not at all like a human
Mm-hmm.
thing, but they felt like 7 or 12 beings
Okay.
as a group, but at the same time, it was one consciousness. And at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, when I focused on them, it felt that there was thousands and thousands and thousands. So it's one of those things where it's not so linear. It's kind of depends how
Right.
you're focusing on them. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, and I know for us humans, it's like, what is it? Either was it one or was it a lot? But I understand what you're saying as far as that it could be five, seven, 12, or thousands, but they could still all have the ability to communicate at once with you and be understood, is what you were.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you ever tell your family, your parents, about what you were experiencing, or you kept it to yourself?
I kind of kept it to myself. I didn't, and that was a good thing, I think, because I think if I started talking about it and everybody would be like, no, 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 you're crazy, there's nothing
Right.
wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, like most kids, I think I would
Right.
have shut it off. So I kind of, and I noticed that I was kind of an observer, like I said earlier, but wanting to understand, how it worked before I spoke about it. And so that's the reason why I didn't share. I kind of took notes, of
Mm-hmm.
how I was feeling and how it all happened. And so I never actually said anything for the longest time.
Right. It's almost like you, despite being a child, you kind of had an idea of maybe it would be better if I just kept this to myself. And as a matter of fact, that is the reason I asked because I've spoken to so many people that sometimes have some type of unusual experience along these lines as a child. And when they tell their parents, some of them, they're told it's your imagination.
Yeah.
Others, unfortunately, are told don't ever talk about that again. In other
Yeah.
words, they're shamed out of whatever it is that they experienced. So they
Right.
learn to keep it to themselves. But children have a lot of wisdom, despite the fact that they're children. So I'm not surprised that you made that decision. And as you during all these years, Caroline, that as you were growing up, like you said, that at certain times you were able to communicate with them. Did they ever give you an idea of why they were there communicating with you? Was it just for comfort, or what? Or did they tell you, "We're going to let you know eventually
Oh
why
yeah.
we're talking to you, or why we're communicating with you"?
Yeah, it was kind of an ongoing unfolding. It was
Okay.
kind of like uh, every time it was, I would see more of the information. So for example, I would say, well, how is it working? Like, how is my brain picking up some signals and
Mm-hmm.
others aren't, or something like that? And so I would kind of understand that the fact that they are connected to my consciousness, it's kind of a resonance thing, you know. So I
Okay.
was resonating, you know, so frequencies were matching, whereas other people's frequencies, brain is not, it's like not on the
Mm-hmm.
same wavelength. So in other words, it was an ongoing unfolding of why they were there. One of the most important thing also to realize that you know, with this connection is that everybody has the exact same connection. In other words, um, that was my particular lineage, but you have the same kind of lineage with your, you know, like everybody on the planet has a lineage,
Mm-hmm.
and those beings, you never, the connection is never severed. So let's say you come from the Pleiades, let's say.
Right.
So, you know, you are part of a collective consciousness of the Pleiades, and you have what I call a spirit family, a lineage. And so when you incarnate in this one body,
Mm-hmm.
that connection is never severed. So they're always communicating with you. And there's a very important reason for that. And that's the reason also why some people communicate with Pleiadians, other people communicate with Arcturians. How come
Mm-hmm.
we're not all communicating with the same people? You
Okay.
know, like some people talk about grays, and for the longest time, I was like, what are they talking about? Like, you know, I mean,
Okay.
so, so the reason this happened is that you are meant to kind of open yourself back up to your individual lineage. And
Okay.
so by doing so, you are then bringing through your human aspect all that frequency, all that intelligence, all that consciousness in your human form. So I'd be bringing my this whole lineage and understanding and consciousness and frequency through my human aspect, through what I write, what I say, what I do. And you're doing the same with Palladian, and the neighbors doing the same with Arcturian, so on and so forth. So if we are conscious about that, then we would be doing this more deliberately. And so all those frequencies and all this information would become part of the human
Okay.
frequencies and understanding. And this is how we contribute to the evolution of the human species, if that
Now,
makes sense.
let me, and I'm really curious about this because you mentioned it. As far as the lineage, are we talking because, as let's say in human form, we've incarnated from the bank of souls that from whatever lineage, or are they or are humans in some way derive actual physical lineage from extraterrestrials from other planets, as in
Mm.
the theory of being seeded or some type of hybrid, anything along, or is it strictly just in a spiritual lineage?
Yeah, it's actually both.
Oh, okay.
So what happens is that, like I said earlier, so everybody has a lineage from their original place where they
Mm-hmm.
were seated. Everybody comes from a source, from the source, you know, like
Right.
kind of
Yes.
the main consciousness of the entire universe, the hub, the heart, the mind, the cosmic mind, God, source, whatever you want to call it, of
Mm-hmm.
this entire universe. Everybody's originally, if you will, from there, but then you kind of, this is where you're created as a consciousness, but then
Okay.
you are kind of seated in one location, you know, this galaxy or another galaxy or this planet or that planet, and then I mean, that becomes your spirit lineage. And so there are certain beings who come to planet Earth, like I just mentioned in my case, for
Mm-hmm.
example, and you open up to that lineage to bring that information in human form. However, there are also beings on the earth that are the offsprings of other material beings, which is what
Oh,
you just mentioned. And
right.
so now imagine that you're from the Pleiades,
Hmm.
and I keep saying that. I wonder if you are.
Who knows? I'm
We're gonna
sorry, but my pie chart doesn't go back that far. I'm
have
laughing because I'm one of those that did the that that you can get your ancestry done. But
yeah.
let me tell you something. I would love to know if what the off planet stuff is. But anyway, go ahead.
Check the box that says
Yeah, I
Pleiades.
know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But yeah. So anyway, like let's pretend that you then are part of the Pleiadians and then you come to the Earth, but you're not here just to implant your lineage. But then that soul group is so advanced that they can create a kind of a hybrid consciousness that is half human, half Palladian, like different in different percentages. But you have to
Right.
be advanced enough to be able to create another material species. So
Hmm.
then this other being that is also on the earth, maybe it's your neighbor for all we know,
Hmm.
uh, they're not exactly doing the same thing as you because then their lineage is kind of a mix of different things as opposed to you coming straight from a Palladian and straight kind of implanting that frequency, if that makes sense. So
Yes.
it ends up being different levels and different layers of combinations of DNAs and lineages. Um, and and so on the earth right now there's a huge percentage, it's a very high percentage of humans. Now, obviously everybody looks human,
Hmm.
but I think there's about two-thirds of the humans that are not totally organic, like pure human, if you will. They're kind
Really
of, yeah, they're kind of a mix of this breed and that breed and this other breed. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means,
different.
yeah, it's just different. Yeah,
And how
yeah.
long did they ever tell you how long they've been doing this? Is it because I know, for example, every time they discover some type of, ancestor of man, or in the link, but they always say, but now we found something new, and there's always what, that typical missing link. They have a lot of different theories. Have they been doing this with humans from prehistory, or are we talking more modern times?
You're talking about the ones that are creating a hybrid species within the
Right,
human. Yeah,
exactly.
actually, it's a more complex question, but
Mm-hmm.
I think just the simpler answer is this has always been happening
Okay.
since the beginning of time, but more for a purpose of evolving the consciousness and more kind of in a subtle way, is more about mutating the current human species to like an upgrading, like to keep
Right.
upgrading it. However, about 200,000 years ago, this is a kind of a bigger story, but I think there's a race that came to the Earth and other planets, by the way, it's not just planet Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of, uh, I want to say, blocked it from the rest of the universe
Okay.
and started to, because, the human species is very young,
Mm-hmm.
uh, very young planet compared with the rest of the universe. And so
Right.
the human species is very, very young. So
Mm-hmm.
these beings came and they kind of blocked it from the rest of the universe. And they started doing experiments. In the beginning, it was just more of a curiosity. It's kind of like, oh, let's put this little baby in this room and not
Mm-hmm.
feed it for 10 days and just see what happens, like, you
Right.
know, and then they were like, oh, well, look, the baby learned how to survive on its own 10 days. Well, let's push it. Let's try it 15 days and see. You know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
kept kind of pushing the game until
Mm-hmm.
it became dangerously not so funny anymore. And it
Mm-hmm.
started to kind of, uh, it kind of became a prison-like kind of experiment because it went on for 200,000 years, and so
Right.
they started to kind of, oh, well, let's mix the baby with the dog DNA and see what that happens.
Oh,
And then you know what I mean? So it was, there started to have, they started to have very dangerously misguided and misaligned intents with this game. And so that, 200,000 years of this, then you end up with a species that's kind of a bit messed up, which
yes.
you can look around and
Yeah.
and see the result of that.
Yes.
So obviously, I'm not saying that
Well,
there are
no, and
no.
you know what? You answered my question because you were describing how there's different groups that whether it's a spiritual lineage or that there's actually some type of physical connection as far as the type. And I was thinking, are they all nice? Do they all get along, or are some of them very respectful as far as, like you said, when they're engaging with humans, whether it's on a spiritual level or otherwise, or are there's like what you just described? How far, to use a very human term, can we push the envelope in
Exactly.
this creation of, or basically putting their hand into the mix of developing either behavior or physical characteristics? Are they all nice? Do they all get along?
Yeah, no, exactly. So what started to happen, some groups, some beings were like, "Whoa, wait, this is we're kind of playing God here, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There are limits to what we're supposed to do. Don't forget, it's a juvenile uh, species, so you're kind of, like I said, like you're playing with a baby, and the baby cannot defend itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the baby ends up growing up in that room. Oh, by the way, did you see that movie Room? If anybody's seen it, it's an amazing story. It's just called Room, and
I
it's
know which one you're
about,
talking about, but no, I have not seen
yeah,
it.
yeah. It's about actually a child that, is born, I think, and grows up in a room because they were a prisoner anyway. So just to say that then the species evolves with this mentality of being prisoner.
Okay.
And so with that evolves, so when that started to happen, other groups, of course, felt that this wasn't the right thing to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason why now we end up with different groups that are completely, in conflict. Some of them have been part of the game for so long that they don't even know it. They don't even know what else is out there.
Okay.
Um, and other beings are extremely conscious of this whole thing and how it evolved, and they're trying to help and stop it. And so this is kind of where we're at right now. It's
Okay.
these different groups of beings doing different things, trying to fix the problem. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And for people that have claim that they've been abducted,
Mm.
as in basically being physically taken, and have they ever talked to you about anything like that, as far as whether they do it or whether other groups do it, or why would they do it? Um, because I imagine there's a school of thought that say, okay, well, maybe they're here, they observe us, but that's all they do. Or if they have contact with us, it's just not so intrusive. And then you get the people that are saying, abduction, sometimes throughout childhood into adulthood, or once, et cetera, et cetera. And is it just that we're talking different groups?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. So there are some groups that are here just observing, others here helping, but just not really interfering, and
Mm-hmm.
others absolutely interfering, not even completely dismissing your free will and doing abductions. So in the film E.T. Contact, my latest film, we
Mm-hmm.
actually have interviewed several abductees, and they tell us their experience. And so, because I don't know if I mentioned it, but throughout, you know the years doing work on consciousness, but that helped me, and because I could see the cell energy very clearly, I work with different people, individuals and groups, and I help them kind of release the trauma, reverse the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of go into the subconscious mind and kind of do that sort of work as well. And
Okay.
so when we were interviewing, the folks who said I was abducted, I want to say that most of the time, um, there was absolutely an actual abduction experience. And in fact, I can see the ships myself, and I can see what happens on the ships.
Wow.
So yeah, so I can tell, and I had the experience, and I kind of was in there with them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I want to say about 70% of the story is 100% accurate, but then the rest of it, it's not that it's not that they're lying or anything, but it's more that they project some of their personal kind of
Yes.
perspective. And it's not that they're doing it to deceive you or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a coping mechanism. So, for example, they say that they're abducted, they look around, there's other people there. Then they're taken into a room, and then there's like this. Usually, that's the typical scenario that there's some sort of electronics or some sort of devices. It's usually all light and not kind of machines like we have, and it's usually some sort of medical examination.
Okay.
And most of them say they took some of my eggs or some of my semen, or
Mm-hmm.
some sort of things like that. And so I feel that because it's kind of an intrusive, obviously, and forceful experience, some of the details get a little bit diluted or confused around, the story. So I
Okay.
think, so I feel like it's their coping mechanism because it's a trauma,
Yes.
but at the same time, it's very, very interesting. Most of the folks that we've interviewed had, even though they were taken by force, but they also had a positive experience
Oh,
because,
okay.
yeah, because they kind of felt at home when they were on the ship. They recognized some of the beings.
Okay.
They were not afraid. They did not, even though some eggs were taken,
Mm-hmm.
but it was kind of energetic. It wasn't, so it's very interesting that
That's
uh, a
yes.
lot of the folks even though they get on the ship and things like that, but it ends up being a positive experience. I'm not saying everyone has a
Right,
positive.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And um and because I consider myself a subconscious behaviorist, so I have a pretty good understanding about how the subconscious works as far as human behavior is concerned. And what a lot of people don't recognize, especially in these situations where people block out a lot of the abduction
Yeah.
experiences, especially if they end up being unpleasant. And that's the
Mhm.
thing, your perception is your reality, but everybody's different. So, for example, those people where for them it was a very horrible or degrading experience, every individual is different, but usually what the mind does is that it will do everything to protect your sanity,
Exactly.
including not letting you remember something right away. And that's why I think sometimes some people start recovering those memories later in life, if they ever do. Sometimes people are never fit to remember because the mind will always try to protect itself. And that's sometimes where you have those people. I'll say that it starts with just some, the dreams. They'll start having these dreams about that experience, and that's kind of like your mind trying to give you, okay, I think you're ready to remember now as to
Absolutely.
what happens. But people don't realize that if something's really that traumatic, like you said before, your mind will really try very hard not to remember it, because especially if they think for some reason you're fragile and you're not going to handle it well. That's why.
Exactly. So exactly what you said. It happens in stages, like a dream first, and then some
Mm-hmm.
sort of deja vu type thing, and yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why, and I guess my point being, I think that there's people out there that have had that experience and never remember it for whatever reason, and it happened, they just never remember it. And then you have the other people that maybe, like you said, their experience was maybe scary, but at the same time they felt okay, like they could handle it, And then there's others that maybe later on in their life they're ready. They can handle, they can process it, to use a very, and they're not going to totally wig out, even though from when you hear these stories, it's like one door opens the other. Once they're aware of this information, then they want to know what happened, how did that happen, and or then they start realizing that it happened maybe more than once.
Yeah.
So, and that puts them on a whole different. I know that for some people, this like it's something that you obviously you live with, but it's always a big question in your life as far as who, why, why me, that kind of thing. And
Yeah. Absolutely. Hmm.
and let me
Yeah.
ask you, Carolyn, when you said as far as the contact that they've had with us, is this, do you think, whether it's the spiritual or otherwise, is it eventually preparing us for at one point that they will not have to be behind the scenes? That
Well, like I said earlier, I think they're meant to be behind the scenes. You are
okay,
meant to, stay in communication and contact with your own lineage. But what happens is that nobody tells us this. Nobody understands even
right,
how, nobody even understands how you incarnate. I mean, they know how you get a baby, how a baby
mm-hmm,
can be, but nobody understands anything about consciousness, how the consciousness occupies the body. When does the consciousness come in the body? And then what happens? Where did it come from? Where does the consciousness, is it like floating in space? Like how, so because nobody tells us any of this, and we're very poorly educated, we're not educated,
right,
then of course by the time we talk about spirit, everybody's like rolling their eyes and what are they talking about? But actually, we are meant to come very consciously, incarnate in a human body, and there's a prenatal contract. You decide. There's no,
yes,
you decide which, where you're going to be born, how you're going to be born, who are your parents, who you're coming with. It's all a very conscious process. And then once you incarnate, I mean, this is a whole very kind of a different type of conversation, how your consciousness breaks down and why you end up forgetting. You don't forget because it's kind of a vicious game. You forget
right,
because you're breaking down your consciousness from being kind of in this infinite vacuum to a very finite body. And so it's all about frequencies. And anyway, so you come into this body, and then by definition you end up forgetting a lot of the previous experience. But the fact that your human brain forgets for a short time doesn't mean that that lineage is gone. It just means you're not aware. So I feel that, for a time you forget, and then eventually you're supposed to remember and reactivate and kind of align yourself with your original lineage and bring all of that information, all this frequency consciously. And so to me, at the end of the day, everybody on planet Earth
mm-hmm.
is having an experience.
Let me ask you, is it possible that somebody that does a past life regression under hypnosis will regress into a lifetime on another planet? In other words, in a
Yes,
non-human lifetime?
all the time. I see this all the time. That's what I do actually. And
Okay.
so most of the time I see somebody is struggling with something, and as you well know, since you work with the subconscious and
Mm-hmm.
and regression and stuff like that, sometimes it's some sort of trauma in a past life. But
Yes.
what I see is the trauma is not even from a past life here. The trauma is way, 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 way before you were ever a human. So
Mm-hmm.
think about that. I mean, so that takes you back to a whole different, level of consciousness. And so going back to something very important that you mentioned, and that we were talking about, which is, do we all I think everybody is still connected. Everybody is still having a is still that conversation, that flow from their spirit lineage into their human brain is coming through.
Okay.
through dreams, through vision, through meditation. And I think it's depending on your individual story, your individual contract, how much, like you just mentioned earlier, you're capable, how much you can handle.
Yes.
And the more you can handle, the more you're going to have these experiences become, conscious. And so some people come in already knowing that they can handle that much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the only one. There are other people like me
Right.
who at a very young age were capable of handling, having a being standing right there and you're talking back and forth and nobody
Mm-hmm.
else hearing and things like that. And so for those kind of people, it's usually to, carve the way, to lead the way into this sort of understanding, but everybody is still connected to their spirit lineage. No exception. That's how it works.
Right. And I imagine also that, like you said, that sometimes, the soul or spirit picks and choose the circumstances that they're going to incarnate. So I imagine also that has to do with, of course, your environment, what they call nature versus nurture. It has to, I guess, affect your ability or willingness to remember to experience certain things. Um, as far as like in let's say in your case that you have this direct communication uh, with since childhood, all the way into adulthood, and then you will get maybe some child that maybe because of their environment they were at that, let's say at that age at 5 years old, this they wouldn't be able to handle it the way you did.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything is different. So I imagine, like, I understand what you're saying, that it's going to depend on what are the circumstances and the emotional makeup or mental makeup of that individual person at that time.
But also you decide beforehand. That's what I was saying.
Right.
So if your story is that, look, I'm going to go down and be in this body and I'm going to completely forget everything and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
kind of just reawaken gradually, but I'm going to be able to handle, kind of coming in contact with spirit maybe every 3-4 years or something like that. So you kind of beforehand, that in your case, you're going to be able to handle it at the age of 5. This is going to happen at the age of 7. This happens at the age of 10, whatever. And we're talking about the main important events. We're not talking about what's going to
Right.
happen
Yeah. The
this
minute.
year.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, yeah. And so because of that, you're going to choose the circumstances that will allow that. So if you are meant to have a very powerful, positive experience, you're going to choose an environment, maybe parents or friends, or who are going to like be there, but kind of be oblivious and kind of leave you alone or whatever.
Yeah. Sometimes that's a good thing.
Yeah, and sometimes, and if you're not meant to awaken, you're going to create an environment coming in that's
Hmm.
not going to even allow you to explore it until at a later time. You see what I mean? So
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
works together. We're a lot more conscious about our contract and the bigger events in our life than we think.
Right. Yeah. I know. As far as just we just don't remember it.
Exactly.
Right. And of course that makes sense because it kind of like if, in other words, being aware of what maybe how many hundreds, thousands, who knows, many years of prior incarnations, whether they're human lifetimes or who knows. I think it would just distract from the purpose of what you're doing, or that you, like you said, you agreed to beforehand, before incarnation
Exactly.
into a human body.
Yeah, and it's actually, I mean, you're supposed to forget, like I mentioned earlier, because it's just too much information. It's like
Hmm.
you've incarnated thousands and thousands of time, and then you're trying to figure out what this earth is about. It's like you can't, it's not necessary for you to be remembering everything about your entire existence. So prior existence, that's one thing. It's hard to focus on your human life and create it. That's one of the reasons why it's useful to remember. And also another thing is when you come in as a human, you're part of a matrix, I mean, time, space continuum that's unique to the Earth, that's different than other planets and other, galaxies or whatever. And so the idea is to experience this awakening and creating your reality within this time space. In other words, when you're in spirit form, you think of something and it just happens. It's just, you know everything, you're tapped into everything. But the idea is that you're here in this human form operating within a time-space continuum, and that automatically is going to give you this experience, the illusion of time and space, and therefore the not knowing. In other words, think about this. If you know exactly every single thing that's going to happen every single minute of your life, like who's going to knock on the door, what you're going to eat, how you're going to feel, how you...
So why do it? It's be so boring.
Exactly. Why do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's like you crunch your entire life into nothingness, into this instant knowing of everything. And so it defeats the purpose of existing within time space, where things unfold through time space gradually, in this gradual manner. I guarantee people complain that they want psychic information, like what's going to happen this and who's going to say that to me tomorrow, and am I going to meet this guy, and again you kind of, it defeats the purpose to know everything about everything. That's the point of forgetting.
Well, yeah, no, well, that's for example, psychic advice, it's only great when they tell you what you want to hear. If they don't, like, what a bad psychic. Because, of course, you're hoping for a certain, scenario to play out. Now, let me ask you, Carolyn, in these conversations that you've had or this knowledge that they've imparted, are they traveling interdimensionally? Are we talking, and I know for us humans, everything is linear, or are we talking that they have found some way to bend time and distance in a way, of course, that we don't know or understand?
You mean the seas?
Do they travel? Are they, in other words, can they project themselves spiritually without physically being here? If they do they do it interdimensionally, or are we talking time and distance? Like you said, these stars normally, we look at them as far as the way we understand light year travel. It would be way, or have they found a way to basically travel these distances in a very short time, not the way we understand it?
Yeah, of course, the travel is instantaneous. It's the whole technology that we have based on propulsion doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Right. But anyway, to go back to your question, when, the typical scenario is when somebody passes, when they die, they shed the physical form, usually within 3.5 days. The consciousness, goes through a sort of another. It kind of continues to exist, but within the Earth plane. Okay. And so the Earth plane is actually, if people are interested, they need to look at. Well, actually, in the film, I have an animation of the Earth planetary grid, which actually divides time and space and explains how dimensions work and how there are specific black holes and wormholes that are specifically positioned, if you will, throughout the planet. Obviously, it's a harmonic. Okay. And so what happens, so those wormholes allow you to transition from, a three-dimensional existence into another pocket, let's say, another frequency range. But you're still within the Earth plane. If you can, this Earth grid, if you can imagine that it expands, it wraps around the planet at 5,000 to 7,000 miles above the surface of the Earth. So if you imagine this whole matrix, if you will, around the planet. So And within this matrix, you have a bunch of all these wormholes and all these things. So when you die, you go through one of these wormholes, and then you transition into this extra additional another dimensional space, so that
Okay.
you're no longer in physical form, but you are still close enough to the human form,
Mm-hmm.
because you're still within this matrix, this Earth grid matrix, within close to the frequency of humans. And so
Okay.
that's, in this case, it's usually after 3.5 days. In this case, the deceased relative is actually physically here,
Okay.
meaning they can still go through this wormhole, make themselves appear to the. I've had so many people tell me that, oh, my grandfather died, but he came to me the next day and told me he was okay.
Right.
And
Yes, I've heard that so often myself. Yes.
yeah. And so because they're still here within these 3.5 days, they can still do that, if you will. But then
Mm-hmm.
once they pass these wormholes and they are in a different dimensional field, then it depends. Most of the time, they have to reincarnate again. There is a kind of a time period,
Mm-hmm.
and so where they cleanse, and they, kind of go through their
Right.
whole, a cleansing of all the stuff they haven't completed or what have you. And then they prepare themselves to reincarnate again, but they stay within this Earth grid matrix. And so when they're communicating with us, they still feel very close because
Mm-hmm.
they are part of this matrix. However, sometimes some folks who are done with this human experience, and they don't have to reincarnate anymore,
Right.
they use these wormholes, and now specific wormholes allow them to transfer their consciousness back to whatever, the Pleiades, Andromeda,
What?
whatever.
Okay. The
At home,
origins of. Okay.
exactly. So you go back home basically, and so now and of course we're talking about instantaneous consciousness transfer. It's through wormholes. It's just all of it is connected. There's no linear time. So they're there.
Right.
So now when they go back to their planet of origin, I can guarantee 99.99% of the time they have no interest, no desire to ever connect back. Even though you were extremely close to a
Mm-hmm.
mother or a friend or what have you,
Right.
but it's kind of you're back to your original state of consciousness, and it's kind of like you've moved on, and it's
Yes.
something very difficult for humans to come to terms with, that, like, oh, how come my mother, we were so close, and now, but it's the truth, because once you are in that state of consciousness, um, it's actually hard for you to come back and communicate again. So that's a typical scenario. I mean, again, it doesn't mean that you don't ever communicate. It just means that's a typical scenario. But then if you do communicate, then now you're in the Pleiades, and then you're not physically here, but you are, your consciousness can send the telepathic message anywhere in the universe. And of course, uh, to the person that's the relative that's still in human
Or
form.
the person that
And,
wants to.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I know that because I work with so many people who say, can you help me? My mother just died, and I can see, and they say, well, I feel her here. And I could tell sometimes she's literally there because it's very close to the time she's passed,
Mm-hmm.
but most of the time she's not even there. She's simply sending that telepathic communication that is tapped into the consciousness of the person I'm working with, so that the person thinks or feels that they're there.
Because I'm guessing, like you said, that once beyond those 72 hours where, you retain your self-awareness of that person, of who you were in that lifetime, in other words.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking this would be equivalent to, let's say, your parents, like you said, the mom, dad.
Yes.
They've moved on, and it's like, when you're on vacation that you're having a great time. Let's say you have adult children and you're on a cruise and you're having a great time, and your kids are calling you going, "Hey, what are you doing?" It's like, "I'm fine. stop bothering me. You know,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They don't want to be bothered, you
right?
know.
I'm fine. Just do your thing, and I'm doing mine. Bye.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, exactly. And most of the and some people have a hard time with this
Yeah,
one because they think, well, how come, you know? But really, it's a different state of consciousness, and sometimes the person, you know, who's still alive, you know, who wants to communicate with their dead mother, is just feeling information that's still in their own consciousness. Basically, it's
right.
a memory of the
Exactly.
mother, and the mother's not even there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's just like the sometimes they're going through the stages of grief, and it's something just to get them through that next whatever is going on with them. Let me ask you, Carolyn, in these communications that you've had with this collective group, now there's a lot of talk about as far as the future of AI, artificial intelligence,
Mm.
with humans, etc. I wonder how they look at that because, there's, I'm going to use that theatrical fear that everybody has, like since everybody saw the Terminator in the 80s of Skynet, where artificial intelligence basically uh, takes over and humans are, under the heel of AI. Have they ever said to you, is that a possibility? Or is that just something that will integrate as humans, but we're still the most important on the species on the planet, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's interesting you asked me this question because I'm going to start lecturing about that. This is a
Okay.
very important topic because AI is definitely creeping up on us. You know, like we think, oh, Alexa's very cute. You know, you ask her, where's the closest restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
And so people don't realize the danger of that. And so it starts to creep up on you as a very fun or helpful machine that can do this and that. But it's really, I mean, there are now robots in Japan
Mm-hmm.
that are, when you go to a hotel, you check in, it's a robot. It's not a human.
Wow.
Uh, Everything is becoming, they're taking digital imprints of your fingerprints
Yes.
that has all sorts of information, your banking information. So when you come in the country, your passport, your credit card, everything is in your fingerprint in this
Mm-hmm.
one, so that you can just enjoy yourself and check into any restaurant, any hotel, go to
Right.
any restaurant and just, do a fingerprint thing and see how practical that is. I mean,
Yeah, but
uh,
it's very
there,
invasive too.
exactly. Saudi Arabia is giving citizenship to a robot. So,
I don't see. I don't understand
yeah, and so
that. Yeah.
it's creeping up. So before we know it, I mean, in a few
Yeah.
years, it's okay. So anyway, but to go back to your question, it is an absolute reality. It is definitely happening, and I feel what's going to happen is that there's going to be a coexistence of, we're going to see that happening, and we are seeing it happen. And I think there's going to be a strong divide in the sense that the people who are really aware of growing organic consciousness
Mm-hmm.
are going to have to kind of really focus on that to make sure that that does not become their reality. And those who really believe in artificial intelligence are going to let that happen so that eventually I feel that there's going to be it's literally reality is going to start splitting up. I'm not talking about tomorrow. I'm talking
You're
about
right.
over 100 years.
Mm-hmm. No,
uh,
I understand, and I
yeah,
think that you said it very aptly. We kind of, for lack of a better word, we get seduced
yeah.
because of the convenience, because, and at some point robotics will take over like drudge work, the stuff that's mind numbing, whether it's manufacturing or even housework, that kind of thing. And then before you know it, it's very invasive. And I'll give you a perfect example. In my acupuncturist office, everybody that works there does a thumbprint when they go in and out of the office. No
Mm,
more, no more stamp. Time. I know the card stamping, that's long ago. And when I was in the workplace, regular workplace, it was basically on the honor system. We had a card basically if we, if it was after hours to get on the elevator, but outside of that, you were there if you were supposed to be there. And I remember when the first time I saw it with a thumbprint, it
Yeah.
was like, okay, what? Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, so it's definitely creeping up, and it's definitely happening. But so also going back to the question, the beings that that are here and assisting this whole
Hmm.
evolution. We're not talking about over the next 5 years or 10 years. You have to look
Right.
at it in terms of the evolution of humanity over 100 and 200 years. So I think there's going to be a lot of weirdness, definitely, with the
Yes.
coexistence of this whole thing. But fast forward, many years, then
Hmm.
this will help the discernment between, okay, organic consciousness versus artificial intelligence, and this will split up, I feel like, the two realities down the road in a very organic way. But just a quick side note,
Hmm.
if that's okay. I'm working with a
Yes.
lot of, with several scientists right now for doing different experiments. One of the experiments is in a film if people want to watch that, but this is just nothing compared with what we're doing right now. But it's basically demonstrating how consciousness is capable of literally changing physical reality. So
Oh.
we have all these measurable actual measurable results of where, okay, so my consciousness is focused on this machine. Well, I can, if I focus it that way, well, the machine shuts off or does something else. And if
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? So we're kind of conducting those sorts of scientific experiments and things like,
Really?
and they're working. So this is kind of a bit of a side note that um, it is such a big belief system that
Mm-hmm.
consciousness is this little kind of insignificant thing when in
Oh,
fact,
no, 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 no. No, it is
exactly,
not.
exactly, when consciousness actually is capable of mastering of physical reality in ways that are so unbelievable.
Right. So
So
what you're talking here is manifestation, the consciousness, not manifestation, but actually being able to affect what you're describing. Let's say a
mind
piece of
over
machinery, in other words, almost like PK ability, I want to say, or not exactly that.
mind over matter.
Mind over matter. Wow.
Yep.
I believe it.
Yeah. And I think that's what's going to happen with that, this whole arrival of the artificial intelligence and, understanding how your consciousness, what it's capable of doing. And you see how those two kind of schools of thoughts are going to be very, um, I mean, clear. It's either this way or that way.
Well, I
You have to
think
make a
I think
choice.
that humans for a long time have underrated them, like you said, the ability of the human mind or consciousness. It's like I
Yeah.
think because we get too scattered too easily sometimes as far as concentration or focus.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the reason why I'm going to start actually for, because I still do conferences and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually the topics is very much that, preparing people how to handle what's coming and how it's kind of creeping up.
Yes.
Strengthening, the consciousness and, doing all these scientific research and experiments. That's what I'm focusing on actually.
Yeah. And I think also because let's face it, it almost seems like technology is speeding up. Like whereas before there was advancements, but it was much slower paced. In other words, people like okay, things are advancing, but it's slower. But nowadays, I think, and in a way, it's very stressful for most humans if they are surrounded by technology, where it seems that you're always off balance a little bit because things sometimes advance so quickly, so rapidly that you kind of like there is no learning curve.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's why I think people sometimes wig out with good reason, by the way, because it's like I don't even understand the technology from yesterday, and now today you're telling me that that's not. Now we got something new to take its place.
yeah, exactly. And that's why it's creeping up on us.
Yes,
So, because
that.
it's like we don't even have time to like, oh, we had the iPhone and Siri. Now we have this
Oh
and this.
no!
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's, yeah.
Exactly. It takes me some time. And let's face it, human beings, we for us to feel kind of like, okay, we need our little routine of something as far as that, when you get used to working with something or knowing something, it kind of like makes you feel centered. But when everything is always constantly changing, you feel off balance. And for human beings, I think it stresses you out to never find a moment where you're like, okay, I'm okay. I can handle this. We're let's face it, we're resistant to change a lot.
Of course, and that's the reason why you have to go back to your core. You have to have a strong, uh, routine. Actually,
Hmm.
meditation, mind quieting, breathing. I mean, all of that is very important. Spiritual hygiene, I call it. So that you don't lose your balance, so that you don't get overwhelmed, like you're saying.
Yes. Yes, and it seems unless you live in a very remote village somewhere where you have little, and even then you see sometimes news from very remote places and they still have cellular phones there. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
inundated, but even there, you can't escape it. But anyway, Carolyn, I want to thank you so, so much for this interview. It has been absolutely fascinating. Not only the work you've done, but what you're telling me, the project that you are working on as far as the ability of human consciousness to affect or manifest in the physical, however it is that you're doing the experiments. Plus, also, what you described as far as the impact of AI, because as much as people don't like it, we're going to have to deal with it.
Absolutely.
There's no
Ab-
escaping it. So, yeah. Thank you so, so much. You have been wonderful, fascinating. I would love to bring you back, uh, maybe in a few months. I don't know if, especially, I'm telling you, that project with the artificial intelligence. I speak to a lot of people who, like I said, like the idea of convenience, but at the same time are thinking, is this ever going to be the worst decision that humans made as far as allowing development of artificial intelligence to such a degree that they subjugate humans? I guess is what everybody fears eventually. You know.
Yes, absolutely. Very relevant topic. Very important.
Again, thank you so much and good luck on all of your projects.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Wow, guys. That was, I'm telling you. Oh my God. You know what? Everybody, she's got so many interesting topics, starting from what happened to her as a child. Uh, that is, like I said, some people handle it, some people don't. And you know, I understand very well that we're not the same. And it's good that we're not the same. But that individuality or that difference allows us to handle certain things physically and or mentally, emotionally in different ways. Some people can handle things, let's say trauma. Some people can handle it. Some people can handle it, but you got to give them a time to process it, like 1 year, 2 years. Depends on what they experience of trauma. Some people never can. Never can. Sometimes because they have other episodes in their life. And it's just because we're all different. We're all different. And then you have people who will recover memories. And I'm not talking about alien abductions. I'm talking, it could just be trauma that they maybe experienced in childhood. They don't process it or remember it till they're well into adulthood. Like I'm talking 50s, 60s, 70s. It's when they start having unusual dreams or something triggers them and then these memories start coming back. Sometimes it takes people that long to remember and then start processing it because maybe it took that long for the subconscious mind to say, you know what? If you start recovering these memories, you're going to be able to handle it. It's going to make you feel uncomfortable. You might get scared, but it's not going to make you insane. And that's when I say that your mind tries to protect you, tries to protect your sanity. And everybody's got different thresholds of what will put them over the edge permanently. And the mind doesn't want that. And sometimes, unfortunately, some human beings, they're exposed or they experience certain trauma that is very hard to come back from. or producing some type of mental illness that that affects them for the rest of their lives. But sometimes the mind says, for the time being, we're going to put this away. And the years go by. And depending on what happens with that person, that information will come back up. And in some cases, it never, ever does. It never does. Because that person bringing that information forward would utterly destroy their mind, their sanity. And she made mention of, towards the end, which I think that is like, let's face it. I know as a hypnotherapist, human beings are very resistant to change. It's very simple. In our minds, change is equal to pain. And we're very basic. Pain or pleasure. And for us, change equals pain because it's the unknown. So we're very kind of resistant to change. And after a while, you learn how to navigate those waters and push yourself forward and get through the uncomfortableness. Like when you start a new job, or let's say you go to school or something and you don't know anybody and you don't know what they're thinking or what they're saying, and you feel really uncomfortable and you don't like it. Then before you know it, a week passes, 2 weeks pass, 3 months, a year, 4 years. Somewhere along the line, that fades away, but that uncomfortableness makes you almost like, I want to go home. I want to go to my comfort zone. You learn to work through that. Some people, they don't like that uncomfortableness, so they resist change. And what she was talking about as far as AI, the point I'm trying to make is, I'm not kidding, guys. Nowadays they've got a lot of shows about extraterrestrials. As a matter of fact, Ancient Aliens is one of them. Back in December of 2017, the government admitted to funding a program to try to identify UFOs, whether they're from this planet or another one. Hey, that's the first admission I've heard of. So all of a sudden, what some people think of as like, there's UFOs, whatever, is like, okay, well, somebody's spending money in the government to find out if they're real. Does that mean? Because, yes, of course, they have had experiences and captured footage of crafts that just do not work like any of the ones we know about. Now you have that. You have how fast technology speeds along. Same thing with AI. Like she said, giving citizenship to a robot. What is that? Okay, so human beings, for us, it's speeding along, I think, too fast. Not only do we sometimes, we're kind of like dig our heels in with a change thing, but, and then you could say, but in this case, I think that human beings have good reason to be feeling a little bit off balance, which, to be perfectly honest with you, I think that a lot of the people that are super stressed out today is because of this. Remember, I come from a generation. Yeah, we had phones when I was a kid. No, not that. But in my lifetime, I've seen and I've experienced where I had one phone in the house in the kitchen, and we lived in a city. It's not like we lived in the middle of nowhere. Okay. Then, and as a matter of fact, I worked for many years in the telecommunications industry. Okay. And then, little by little, you saw the first computers, MS-DOS, beepers, emails. I've gone through that whole range of technology that's progressed and progressed and progressed. Answering machines. And all of a sudden the phones, before, when they had those block phones that you had to be really, really rich to have those block phones, because they were, first of all, they were really expensive, or if you had one installed in your car, before you knew it, everybody had a phone. The flip side of that is you were expected to answer the phone. Okay. I remember nowadays most people that work for different companies or agencies, they got GPS transponders on your vehicle. Okay, talk about monitoring. Okay, now can you imagine? In other words, I've seen the progression of AI, because really what it boils down to is AI, because what happens is all these things that are going on in the industrialized world as far as this, a lot of it is driven because it's just too much for a human being to monitor, that they have what they call bots or things to monitor and to, pick up what in some cases, depending on what industry it is, algorithms, or hey, this happened, or hey, that workman that we have in this truck that's supposed to be at this address, why are they at that address? That kind of thing. And after a while, for human beings, this can wig you out, and with good reason. And that project that she's talking about, I think that's super interesting as to how we're going to handle it in the future. Like she said, even, and I think a lot of human beings are now kind of putting the brakes on, because it's like, yeah, it's great. If I had a robot that came and did my housework or does the drudge work, but man, do I have to worry that one day? let's take a scene from my robot. My robot decides, sit down, you're not going anywhere. Physically, they're made of metal. They're more powerful than you are. Or Terminator. Let's do the Terminator version. We have an AI super duper computer become self-aware and basically take everything over, because all of our systems that run our cities, our government, everything are computerized. Because that's really what the theory is of it was about Skynet, that it would take over, and since it was already basically hooked up to everything that we depend on to run our lives in the modern world, that's how they were able to do it. It's going to be very interesting. It's very interesting. I think robotics does have a future for us, absolutely, because it has sprung up from out of our intelligence. But at the same time, I can see where sometimes certain things are done or invented without really thinking. In other words, the invention is, well, it will solve this problem, but sometimes I don't think they look beyond as, well, it'll solve that problem, but what other problems are going to come with once you solve that problem, but in place of that one, now you have 3 other more severe problems as a consequence of that. Is my point. Like this is like, sometimes when they'll introduce a species of animal or insect to an environment trying to take care of thing, and then that thing does that, but then it becomes more invasive than the original invasive species they were trying to eliminate. That kind of thing. Like it grows heads. And I think sometimes it's, in the sciences sometimes, and I mean, and it's not even the robotics. There's a lot of stuff going on with the human genome. As far as she mentioned it. I mean, sometimes it begs the question: where are we getting these ideas from? She's here talking that we have a connection through lineage, through distant planets in other galaxies, and also that there's human hybrid products as far as humans. And then you hear now not only of AI, but some of the sciences going and doing work with the human genome. In other words, let me use another Hollywood example, because it kind of picture paints 1,000 words. The island of Dr. Moreau, where we're working with not a hybrid of human and animal. And you might think, well, I'm going to give you a perfect example. A few months ago, I had a conversation with a priest who was a professor at a university, and I was asking him what classes he was teaching, and he explained to me that he was doing a class for bioethics. I said, bioethics, how interesting. And I said, what is that class about per se? He goes, well, this is about the ethics of when they start doing work exactly like that in laboratories with either cloning or human genomes, or in that case, he gave me an example. I believe it was in a lab out of the United States in Spain, where they were working with splicing human and pig Yes, like oink oink. Uh, Bioengineering, something along those lines. I was like, what? And I said, but why are they doing that? And he says, because they want to prove they can. And that to me was like, again, okay, you want to do it because you want to do it, and then what? That's, and I'm going to give you a story. I'm going to go real quick before I end the show. This was many, many years ago. I don't know if you all remember that Omni magazine. I still believe it's published. I'm not sure. I lost track of the actually publisher. It's still just on the internet. But anyway, Omni magazine for many years. I think this was back in the 90s when I read this article. It was always posting articles about science discoveries or things that they were working on. And this was right around the time that they were starting to really unlock the secrets of DNA and the human genome. And I remember the article, it was describing how in the future they were considering being able to clone a human being. And I'm sure you guys have heard of this. But back then in the 90s, this was like, when I read it, I was like, man, this just doesn't sound right. Where they would clone a human genome, a human being, in other words, take out the part of the brain, in other words, manipulate it so that, in other words, it would only have the part of the brain that you need for the body to stay alive, the breathing function, the to keep the respiration, blah, blah. But all the other part of the brain that makes you who you are, your individuality, would not be there. And that the idea for this was that this body was going to provide body parts and organs. And I'm sure that there's been theories even of, like, if you're super duper uber rich, that you just get a clone of your body in case you ever need a spare part, whatever it might be. But like I said, this was back in the 90s when I read this article in Omni, and I was like really disturbed, and I'm pretty open-minded because, believe it or not, it's not that they could do it because, let's face it, the writing's been on the wall as far back as when they started cloning sheep. Surprise! Because now a lot of these labs are held by private firms. It's not like a university that depends on grant money. They've got companies with deep, deep pockets who fund these labs, and sometimes they'll take them out of the U.S. or any type of supervision. But anyway, I was like, okay, so, all right, just because they cut out that part of the brain or they engineer the cloned body not to have that part of the brain that makes us sentient or us, but then it has that part of the brain that keeps the body alive. But does that body still have a soul just because it doesn't have a self-awareness? It was like, oh man, that's an ugly rabbit hole I don't want to go down. And I think that sooner versus later, we're going to be faced with a lot of predicaments like that, whether it's with engineering human beings for the future or, I don't know, human beings for the future, artificial intelligence, our contact with beings from whether it's other planets, other worlds, other dimensions. Oh, wow. But anyway, let's end this on a more happy note. Let me show you something. Oh, wait a minute. Come here. Well, guys, you know who this is? This is my latest edition. Okay, I haven't named him yet. He's so cute. Here he is. Here he is. Let me give you a little bit of backstory to this baby. Back in March, I rescued a rescue. I follow all the rescue, pet, when people lose their pets on the internet, they post them. I saw this little dog and I contacted the people that found her. They were trying to find the owners. And I said, look, if you can't find the owners and you can't keep her, let me know. Sure enough, about a month later, 2 or 3 weeks, they contacted me and they said, look, we've taken her to the vet. She has no chip. We have posted signs all over the place. We've put her on those different internet sites for when nobody's come forward for her. We can't keep her, etc. Make a long story short, she's down there. She's my girl. She's a little white poodle, toy standard poodle. So I bring her home, cute thing, good girl, real sweet girl. And of course, but she had her hair grown out. I take her to the vet because I have other dogs that get her checked out. Sure enough, no chip. I start giving her vaccinations. In the process, the doctor said, you know what, let's not all do them at once. Let's just do them every 2 weeks. And anyway, she looks to be in good shape. about 3 weeks ago. I finally get her. I had to groom her over for her and my other two dogs that got the longer hair. And when they shave her, I look at her and I go, "Oh my God, she's pregnant." What happened is that she's just one of some dogs, like just like people, they pop when they're pregnant, and some she wasn't. I was like, "She's pregnant." I run to my vet. They're like, "Yeah." She had a little tummy. She just wasn't. They took an X-ray and they found two puppies in there. Unfortunately, she ended up, she couldn't birth one of them, and she had to have a cesarean. They tried to get her one, and apparently one of the puppies died because it was stuck in the birth canal. To make a long story short, if you looked at the puppy, does not look like a white poodle, does it? The vet's telling me, look, I look at that puppy, and this puppy looks like what she mated with was possibly either a pit bull, a larger pit bull, or an American bulldog. Because that's why, as a matter of fact, the vet told me that the puppy that died was even bigger than that one at birth, and that's why she couldn't birth him. In other words, he goes, it was no poodle head that was trying to come through. So, for all those people that think that certain dogs can't mate, surprise. But anyway, that's my latest addition. I'm very happy with my new boy. So, if anybody's got suggestions for a name, probably by the time this show comes out, I'll have thought of a name. I've got a few thinking, but I'm so happy. I got scared there for a while and I wish both of them were survived, but yes, that's my good news. So guys, I hope you like the show. Thanks for coming every time that I put a show out. Please go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com so you can submit your true story. My True Believers, just go to that tab. Catch me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or if you're listening to the podcast version, you can go to Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Mixcloud. I'm all over the place, and just look for Miami Ghost Chronicles or Stories of the Supernatural, and you will find us there. And again, thank you so very much for being part of my audience. Take care.